Jack it up.
Hello and welcome to this Volkswizard video blog on this 2007 Audi RS4 Avant. Regular visitors to my channel will recognise this car from one of my first videos that I made in the summer of 2016, and as the car's back with me now, I thought it would be a good opportunity to make a better version of that video with a few more buying tips. Just a quick summary of this car. It is, as far as I know, the only one in Nagaro Blue in the UK. You could have had a B5 in Nagaro Blue, you could even have a B8 in Nagaro Blue, but to get a B7 in Nagaro Blue you had to special order it through the Audi exclusive programme. They charged you about 1800 quid, and not many people did. Well, only one person did, because it was so similar to Sprint Blue. Anyway, we're going to redo this video and I'm going to give you even more buying tips and give you a good look around this car, and hopefully you will appreciate how good an example this is and what to look for if you go and buy one, because they are brilliant cars. They're one of my all-time favourite cars, and definitely my all-time favourite RS of the moment. So without any further ado, let's go and have a look around. I think this year we're going to start by looking under the bonnet. It's an aluminium bonnet on these, which is different to every other A4, even the S4. The convertible though, a RS4, still has a steel bonnet which looks distinctly different to here. Right, well, we don't have turbos, we've got a V8 here. It's 414 brake horsepower, 420 PS. Well, there's no good reason why these cars won't do 150,000 miles without anything needing to be done, gearboxes, clutches, as long as they're not abused, which is the thing you've got to be careful about. There are a couple of things under here that you need to watch for. One of them is there's a sensor, a solenoid under here that opens an air flap in the airbox that lets more air in at 5,000 revs, and they were failing when the cars were nearly new. So to test that, it's quite tricky. You need to use VAGCOM and run a diagnostic test. That's quite important. Also, you get vacuum leaks, which means the exhaust flaps don't work, or if somebody's unplugged the exhaust flaps so they're always open, that can cause no end of problems. Again, diagnostics is your way forward. Checking the coolant's a good idea on any car, but particularly on these, because underneath each headlight, down there, you can't see it today, it's too bright, there's an auxiliary radiator which gets trapped with, they get covered with leaves and other sort of debris, and they corrode and they leak, and you can smell that smell of antifreeze. It is more often than not caused by the auxiliary radiator. I haven't heard of a radiator failing yet, apart from through impact damage. So they're quite important to check. Just smell it when it's warm, see if you can smell that spicy smell that's antifreeze. What else we have behind here, and again I can't show you really, but there's an oil cooler sitting along here that has a connection here with a hose that goes to the sump, and all that can corrode and eventually it will leak. So a little telltale, or quite a big telltale if the leak's bad, is oil on the floor or on the under tray. The early stages it just sort of sits on the under tray really, it won't drip on the floor, it's just a mist. But if that is corroded, you either need to change the hose, which if you're lucky you might be able to cut off without damaging the oil cooler, or if the oil cooler's gone as well and you can't get the hose off, you need to replace the oil cooler, which is a good few hundred quid. The auxiliary rads, I think they're a couple of hundred quid each, and they're not too bad to do, especially if you take the headlight out, which I didn't do the first time because it's much easier to do it that way. But generally they are pretty reliable. There's rumours of, well, not rumours, there is evidence of carbon fouling on cars driven in a certain way in certain areas of the country with certain fuels being used, but it's not by any means going to affect every car. If the front bumper's been off, it's quite hard for garages to get this bit right. There's usually too big a gap there. That's just about right, I think. Okay, next up, let's have a look at the brakes. This car has got some very big brakes. I can't remember what the size is. 365mm, whatever. They're really expensive. I tend to remember the price more than the size. Luckily, all of a sudden Brembo now are offering these on the aftermarket. You don't have to go to Audi for them, which means that places like Stoke Audi that were cheaper than I could buy them were selling them to you. Brembo now are even cheaper than them. So I think I paid about £500 for these Descend TRW pads, which are really good pads. If you went to Stoke Audi, it's like £620 or something for just the discs, and that used to be cheap. So that's one good thing about a car hitting 10 years. I think the contract with Brembo finally allows them to supply to the aftermarket, which has got to be good. So these ones are brand new. There's no lip. I think they've done probably about 10 miles. Yeah, so it's something to consider, but not as much as it used to be. What I can't show you again in here is the shock absorbers. Now, you really need to think of DRC as a normal shock absorber, but they are hydraulic. The shock absorbers are hydraulically linked diagonally across the car, and they give the car really good ride comfort without making it too wallowy. If you've ever driven an S4, you'll find it's a really hard car because it doesn't have DRC. Well, you know, an RS4 is still meant to be an executive car, so it still needs to be comfortable, but they found a way of making it comfortable and handle better by using DRC. Unfortunately, it's not the most reliable system in the world, and you do get leaks. The way to check it, which is what I did with this car, is to put the car on the ramp and just inspect the shock absorbers for moisture. Simple as that. It's not a particularly clever system. I don't think it's got any electronics. If there's a leak, there's a problem. People like Unit 20 and MRC now can fix this. You don't have to go to Audi, and that's got to be a good thing. But you know, if the car drives okay and it isn't banging or wallowing excessively, you probably haven't got a problem. Again, the back discs are pretty special. These are more like the B5 RS4 back disc with an aluminium bell, pins holding the disc, and they're quite expensive as well. I haven't looked into buying these on the aftermarket, but they weren't an awful lot cheaper than the fronts when you had to buy them from Audi. So again, consider the condition of these quite carefully. The tyres are 255 3519. They're not particularly expensive. They fitted them to the TTRS, so I think they're probably just over £100 each nowadays for a decent tyre. But again, you don't want to be caught with that if you can avoid it. So have a good look at the tyres. A typical A4 thing is a loose door handle. This one I have tightened up, but you can find that slides a bit to the left and right. It doesn't feel particularly good quality when you try and open the door, but there's a couple of things just in there that you can slide together to make it tighter. Stone chips on the mirrors, I guess stone chips on the front of the car will always be a problem on cars like this, as is the windscreen, and stone chips on the leading edge of the roof are quite common. One of my real bugbears with the B7 RS4 are the exhaust flaps, which are located in there. Again, the light's a bit funny, you might just be able to see it, but basically in that oval set in about 10 inches are a couple of circular holes, like a twin exhaust system, but one of them has got a flap that does that, like a throttle almost, but it's operated by vacuum through the valve you can just see on the right there. And quite often, because they're full of carbon and soot and horrible stuff that comes out the exhaust, they do stick in position and they don't work. So the trick is to, when the engine's warmed up, put it into sport mode using the button on the steering wheel, and they should open up, and the car should be audibly louder from within the car. So that's a basic test. But with the engine off as it is now, they should be open. Okay guys, we're in the car now, and a few things to check on these. Every A4 B6 and B7 suffers from a broken glove box hinge. They tend to, there's like a shock absorber in there that makes it damps, and they stiffen up, and then the hinge breaks down here, and the only way to fix that is to replace the lid. That's about £100, and it's a bit of a fiddly job. Change the barrel over as well, so best to avoid that. When the aircon's not working, the econ button won't go off. So econ means the aircon's not working, light on means aircon's not working, and yeah, if there's a fault it won't go off, but this one's blowing alright. The front centre armrest lead, that's leather, and they're quite expensive to replace. It's really easy to break them because people lean on them and snap the hinges down there. So worth checking that works. As mentioned before, sport button. Don't know if you can hear that, but that's sport button on, sport mode on. Just turn the aircon off, that's quieter. So sport mode off now, sport mode on now. Try that from outside. So that's sport mode off. I'm going to put the camera out here. Just going to go in and press sport. That's on. And that's off. That's off now. So from inside the car it just sounds a bit bassier when sport mode is on. Okay, it's pretty obvious, but these seats are very heavily bolstered and they can wear quite a lot. This is worn a bit, it's a bit of a patina, you could say. I don't mind that myself, it's not looking too tutty, but cars were like this when they were, you know, a year old, probably 2 years old, so that's done pretty well. The other thing to check is that the bolsters go in and out. Okay, so that's that lower bolster going in. Can you see that? That is a bit weird. I'm not a big fan of those really, because it's another thing to go wrong. But yeah, I'm just operating that switch on the side there. The ignition's not on, so they work without that. And there's the upper one as well, which you can just see moving there. It's a bit weird, it's like flexing a bicep. But yeah, definitely potential for that to go wrong rather expensively. And you can link it so they get tighten up when you press the sport button, which is one of the stupidest things I've experienced in an Audi ever. I tend to switch that off straight away, just because, you know, a seat's comfortable in one position in my eyes. And while we're talking about sport buttons, just make sure that button's not worn, because that's quite a good indication as to how the car's been used. So that's just a little film of design on there that does wear off really easily, so that's actually perfect. A good tip if you're going to check for previous paint repairs, just have a look down here, because this is where the new paint and the old paint meet, and there's usually a rough patch, but this is really good. It's no guarantee, but any decent body shop should make that quite invisible, but most of them don't. It's also worth looking at the screw here that's in between the door and the wing, that holds the wing to the body. If that's been tampered with, that's not a good sign. Rear wiper motors on these cars can fail, so just check that works. Parking sensors aren't always reliable either, so just check they work. You've got front and back on these. Actually, let's have a look in the boots. Check these seams are nice and smooth, which they both are. Okay guys, here we are behind the wheel of a B7 Audi RS4, and considering it's based on a normal Reps car, the A4, which is mainly TDIs, it does feel like a pretty impressive place to be. The bucket seats, which aren't to everybody's taste, are pretty special. They're really comfortable, they look great, and the flat bottom wheel, again, it's not everybody's taste, but it does set the tone. We've got carbon fibre as well, which looks just really high quality. The B7 interior was peerless. The B8, in my opinion, wasn't as good, and it drives really well. You would not notice this car had the performance it had by the way it drove. A B5 RS4 had a very heavy clutch, the steering was really heavy, even the gear shift was a little bit peculiar. This car drives normally. If you gave it to somebody who wasn't into cars, they wouldn't complain and say this car was awful to drive like you had with the B5s. It does drive like a normal car, but if you want to wind it up and get the performance out of it, it performs even better than the B5. Although some people are big fans of the turbo engine, this is a normally aspirated engine. It does put its power out in a very different way. You have to wind it up. Some people don't like revving cars beyond 5,000 RPM. This does all its work beyond 5,000 RPM, so it's really important it has good oil and gets warmed up and is driven, you know, sympathetically really. But you do have to thrash it, and it does respond to that. It's not a particularly noisy car. The DRC suspension, when it's working, is a pretty good compromise between ride quality and handling. If you've ever driven a B7 RS4, it has the most rock hard ride because it's just got hard shocks. Because it's got a big engine up front, and to make the suspension work in a traditional setup, the only thing they can do is make it hard, which is great for Germany, but this feels similar, just the shocks through the suspension are that little bit softer. So yeah, DRC, when it works, is really good. I have driven coilover cars and they're pretty good as well, but yeah, I think for comfort these are just a little bit better. Okay, so let's put it into fourth. Again, got to get the revs up, and this is quite a long geared, so we're already doing quite a high speed in fourth, and we're nowhere near the rev limit. So really on this kind of road we're just not really suited to it. Fourth. Yeah. On the brakes, a bit of weave because the road surface isn't particularly smooth. Yeah, so that's deceptive. RS4 B5s were all about the bang. When the turbo came in, it was bang, and they really didn't get much quicker in the rate of acceleration. They revved out quite high, but this car is like the old 16 valve Mark II that rev high, and they perform their best above 5,000, you know, butting up to the rev limiter, which for a V8 is quite an unusual occurrence because they tend to be grunty cars, and the S4 actually is a completely different engine and is a very grunty car. Anyway, we go back to join the dual carriageway. I'll put it into sport mode, which doesn't actually make it drive any better. I'm in second gear now. There is quite a lot of traffic. It's a Friday afternoon and we're out. Pop it into third. Okay, that's sport mode. That is as loud as this car gets. You can see why people fit Miltech exhausts. Not least because when the exhaust valves fail, it's probably cheaper to go and get a Miltech anyway. This car has had two tailpipes at great expense, and it's still running a standard exhaust. Okay, so yeah, I feel a lot of weight, but it does turn in quite well. In second, right then, let's get it reversed. 5,000. And that's 6,000, 7,000 into fourth. Onto the brakes, which are pretty good. These are brand new, they've not even been bedded in yet. You get the idea, I think. Okay guys, that's the B7 Audi RS4 in a nutshell. It's still a very special car and worthy of its legendary status. They're 10 years old now and they were very well made, so they should still feel rock solid if they haven't been abused too much. The interior is a little bit dated and the navigation's quite a bit dated, but everything works really well, and I think it's more important to have quality than it is to have gadgets, and that's what you got with these. The engine is a masterpiece. It loves to rev, which for a V8 is really unusual. There wouldn't be any use if the handling was rubbish, and the handling is very good. It's also quite a comfortable car thanks to DRC, and yeah, it's definitely one of my favourite cars of all time. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and if you have, give it a thumbs up. Do subscribe for more because there will be more soon, and hope to see you soon. Cheers!